Wow, I love tier list content. That. Said the Moonkin to the other Moonkin. All right, so I'm joined by Corey, and today we are going to be talking through the beta dungeons and kind of giving a tier list of how we feel about the dungeons, kind of talking about the things that we find fun, the things that we don't like, and just kind of ranking where we think positionally these dungeons are currently, at least in the Dragonflight beta. Obviously, things are subject to like massive change relative to reworks of trash, changing of tuning, that kind of stuff. But I think ultimately we kind of have a good idea of around where these dungeons are at least going to land in season 1, and we kind of wanted to talk through what we thought about them. So let's talk about the parameters we have for ranking the dungeons. The top 2 parameters we have are replayability and length of the dungeon, correct?
Yeah.
I think maybe you disagree, but I think that just generally replayability is like how many times can I do the dungeon over and over again before it gets no longer fun. I think that's probably one of the most important things. Obviously, this is not really like an objective. This is like a super subjective metric. But I do think that there's like a variable of like, oh my God, is this dungeon fun? And then I think length. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I think that checks out because if you look at. Well, I was just going to say, well, it's going to go after you explain why length is good, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, yeah, because like if you have a 45-minute dungeon, generally people are just not going to like it. It's also going to be harder to replay, and you're going to have less runs. Like are you going to find this fun to do on a weekly key, or are you going to see that and you're going to be like, nah, that's not for me?
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at things like the 30-minute dungeons like Gambit and Halls versus the play rate of like a DOS,
yeah,
Sanguine Depths, which had long timers, nobody wanted to do those keys, like difficulty aside.
I think that that's pretty reasonable. I think that it's really difficult to put a subjective rating on, or put an objective rating on like how fun is the dungeon to play. But like whatever you are playing, like a really fun dungeon, you kind of know. I do think that like more often than not, it comes down to like how replayable is this dungeon, what is the length of it. Now we do have some deductions that you and I kind of talked through, and the ones that we have written down right now are RP checkpoints, poorly designed trash, poorly designed bosses, and tuning. Obviously, there are a lot of different deductions that you can give depending on how you feel. Anything really jump out to you?
No, those sound pretty good to me.
Yeah, obviously things like RP are really fucking annoying.
Yeah, RP and checkpoints are probably the biggest two. Because tuning can always get fixed.
I feel like poorly designed bosses and poorly designed trash can go under the radar if they're supplemented. I don't think that poorly designed trash can go under the radar. I think that poorly designed bosses can go under the radar if they're supplemented by really good, well-designed like trash and pathing and stuff like that. Obviously, these are like deductions. Like these are at a default, not things that you notice in the dungeon until they are done, I guess, poorly, more or less. Yeah. Then obviously tuning's subjective to how Blizzard is going to do things, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I think how I'm going to do this is we're going to talk a little bit. I'm also going to put some B-roll footage over this in post-production. That way we can have some footage over while we're commentating this thing. But let's get this started with Algeth'ar Academy. I'm feeling a hard S for this dungeon.
I'm also feeling a hard S. I think it's probably the best dungeon in the set. I don't think it's close.
All right. So I think that it's very good that we both agree that Algeth'ar Academy is the best dungeon in the season. So I guess what exactly is your reasoning for immediately putting it hard S? What are like pacing. The things that stand out?
The pacing is really good.
What exactly do you mean when you say that?
Well, like there's a good amount of trash, and then there's a boss, and then there's a good amount of trash, and there's a boss, and there's pulls that you can make variable sizes, whether you want to do 1 pack at a time or 12 packs at a time. Nothing feels over or under-tuned. There's no cringe RP. The checkpoint is kind of bad, but I'm willing to look past that.
The checkpoint is okay. If I had to give it deductions, the checkpoint kind of sucks.
Yeah, starting at the start of the key every time, especially when you're far on the bird, really bad.
I actually do think that this dungeon has one really poorly designed boss, so the bird boss. It has a sacking sonic screech debuff that you get from whenever it does like this interrupting shout mechanic. Yeah. And around the 4 to 5 stack point is when it should start like one-shotting players almost 100 to 0, because the more of them you get, like the harder it hits. And you're supposed to reset it by shooting the balls, not shooting, but like using the extra action button to throw the balls into the net. But like realistically, if you start to do higher keys, the boss is going to start one-shotting you. Now, is it really going to happen to a lot of players? No, but I do think fundamentally that's not a well-designed boss.
I would agree that that's not a good boss, solely because you can only use each interrupt once. So if you don't kill it in a set amount of time, you just lose. I think that's kind of not great. Uh, Additionally, I think that the 2 stops are pretty imbalanced.
Yeah.
Like you always would rather get the fire stop because it gives you a damage amp than the wind stop that blows you around for the rest of the fight and knocks you around and kills you.
All right, so just a one more quick deduction. I do think that the trash that's in the elemental boss area is not the greatest design trash, especially those elementals that cast surge on
There's
players.
a lot of kicks going on and not enough kicks to get them all.
Yeah, I do think that those trash packs in general are very difficult to deal with. If you're not in a coordinated group, you may start to have real struggles on them. If you're playing and you have like really coordinated kicks for making sure that the books are getting their stun cast interrupted and the elementals are getting basically all their surge kicks kicked as you can, it's mostly fine. But I do think that trash is very difficult to deal with. With those deductions aside, though, I do agree. S tier dungeon.
Still think it's the best. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it has like high trash density. You're able to pad your overall. Honestly, it's got some RP at the very beginning of the dungeon where you select like a shrouded style buff that just gives you 5% stats at the very beginning of the dungeon, but it's not like super annoying or anything.
It takes like 2 seconds. I really don't think it's that bad.
I think it's just cool. I think that overall the dungeon is good though.
Yeah, when I think of bad RP, I think of like Spire's elevator where you gotta wait 35 seconds to go to the last boss.
Necrotic Wake.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
King's Rest before they fixed the door.
Yeah, so I do think that overall Algeth'ar Academy's pacing, and then just like also 32-minute dungeon. I think that you're able to do this dungeon over and over again. It feels almost Freehold-esque, where it's got some like really annoying parts of the dungeon. Freehold had some really annoying parts of the dungeon, particularly the bosses that would one-shot you and whatnot. But at the same point, the trash was designed so well, and you felt like you were always doing a new run every single time, and you can kind of get back in there and you're like, all right, I'm ready to go blast, and you link the damage meter to your friends if you do it over 100k DPS, and you're like, God, I own.
Yeah, I think that's represented on beta already too. That's like the only key that anybody wants to try or wants to pug.
Yep. Okay, I think that's basically enough for Algeth'ar Academy. Azure Vault. What is your initial, where exactly do you want this dungeon to go?
This might be a ranged brain take, but I don't think it's as bad as everybody says. I think it's a B. A low B. I could argue for it to go to C.
Oh gosh,
I think that dungeon is not as bad as everybody says it is.
All right, I'm vying for C.
All right, I could take a C.
I think that okay, and let me just kind of explain why I'm really feeling C. So playability. Okay, so lengthwise, it's not that bad. What is it? A 35-minute timer?
I think it's a 30.
Okay. Well, no, they buffed it from 30.
Oh, if they buffed it, then yeah.
It got buffed. It's not a long dungeon. It's not over the 40-minute mark. We only have one dungeon that's 40-minute plus, and that's Nokhud at 40. So Azure Vault is not the longest dungeon, but I think that this dungeon has a lot of deductions on my end. I think the replayability is not that high. You're effectively kind of limited in your pathing. It does have 120% enemy forces in the whole entire dungeon, but you're not really able to skip a lot, just all things considered. And I think that makes the replayability of the dungeon a lot less than something like Algeth'ar Academy, where there are a decent amount of mobs that you can just walk by and skip, and you can kind of create your own routes.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I remember we were talking last week, whenever it was, and
yeah,
my big point was that it says that there's like more than you need in the dungeon, but there's really not.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think the biggest deduction for me is poorly designed boss, or not poorly designed boss, poorly designed trash. I think that a lot of the trash mobs have heavy movement swirly effects. In addition to that, there's I don't want to say a decent amount of frontals because it's actually not that bad, but I think there are a lot of frontals.
Proportionally to everything else, there's a lot in there.
Yeah, so I just don't like, and I feel like whenever you're playing the trash in Azure Vault, it's just really not fun. And I think trash is most of my enjoyment in M+ is fighting trash in some capacity. And so whenever all of these mobs have a decent amount of interrupts, frontals you have to dodge, on top of that, they're spawning swirlies, like 3 swirly mobs per pack, you just kind of lose me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm definitely in for this.
Do you know what the second boss's name is? The Dragonkin boss?
Yeah, Azure Blade.
That's got to be
I
one.
have it up in front of me right now.
It's got to be one of the worst bosses of this season.
Really,
right?
I think it's not that bad. I actually think that the third boss is way worse.
Okay, I really don't like the intermission on Azure Blade.
I would agree the intermission is a lot with 4 ads that are going to scale really high, and the boss is going to take forever. I think if there were less ads, the intermission would not be that bad.
Yeah, so at 66 and 33%, the boss runs in the middle of the room.
It's time. It's not even percent.
Oh, it's not. It's time?
No, it's time. That's why it's going to get even worse the higher you go.
All right, well,
we got 3 in a 16 I did with Greg last week.
I'm doubling down on my opinion then. So if it is timed, then it summons 4 ads that have like not an insignificant amount of HP. On top of that, every, I don't know, 3 seconds, it summons this wave of orbs that like shoot out really fast from the boss, and if you get hit by them, you're gonna die. And so it's a very movement heavy phase. And it's just difficult to deal with. I really don't like that boss. I think that there's a lot of deductions in this dungeon. I don't think it's very fun to play. I think that I would really like for them to rework a lot of the trash before it would become fun.
Yeah. So when we started this dungeon and I said I think it's a B, I was definitely lying.
Okay. So
now that I'm thinking about this dungeon again, it's a C, and I'd argue it could go D.
I think it is one of the worst dungeons this season, but I don't think that anything needs to go into D. I think that D is like a dungeon that whenever I see it, it's like I have this urge to never zone into the dungeon again, and I don't think I have that yet for this dungeon. Now, is it fun? No. But is it like okay. I refuse to play this dungeon?
I guess I can agree with that. Yeah. So yeah.
My all-time D tier dungeons are, wait for it, Siege of Borealis.
Yeah, okay.
And so it's not that bad, but it's not good.
Okay, it's definitely not Siege of Borealis. I think I would put Theater of Pain down there also.
You're making a compelling argument for saying C.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, Court of Stars. So one of the Legion Legacy dungeons that is brought back. And this may be a contentious opinion. I think this dungeon's an A. I like playing this dungeon. I think it's short, 30-minute timer. You're probably in and out in like 25, if I'm going to be honest. And I think it's really fun. I think that the design of like some of the first pulls in the dungeon, I don't mind them. I think it's done pretty well. What are your general thoughts on Court of Stars?
I personally think it's a B.
Okay.
Although I could be argued into an A the same way I was argued down to a C. I think that the overall replayability of this dungeon in particular for me is lower because you already spent 2 years playing it.
Really? Oh, because you already spent 2 years playing it. Interestingly enough, in my mind, the replayability of this dungeon is really high because of the a lot of the variants that you have in the dungeon. What are your
like the buffs and stuff?
Yeah, you want to talk about the deductions, perhaps the RP deductions?
yeah. So RP, that area before the last boss, in the running for my least favorite thing to do in any key.
Okay.
Even though
the spectral sight, the demon.
Yeah, the spectral sight thing. Pretty much done with an add-on. Still don't like it. Even though you can choose it with spectral sight and truth guard, I still think it's bad.
Okay.
I think that the start of the dungeon, like the freedom to pull the dock or not, and like change what trash you want is good. Mm-hmm. The dungeon is short, so I never feel like I'm slogging through it for an hour of my life.
It's short and it's high intensity at the very beginning, which I do like.
Yeah, except the boat ride. Okay, the RP boat ride, that's gotta go.
Okay, I could give them a pass on the boat because it is at the very beginning of the dungeon, so I don't really feel like I'm losing time now.
But that's the thing, because if you think about the King's Rest door, which is the same thing, RP at the start of the dungeon, they had to change it because you lost 1 minute on the key. Same thing here, you lose 1 minute on the key.
I was just mad that I was in King's Rest.
Well, yeah, for sure.
Talk to me about professions.
Limiting. I think it's kind of bad for pugs in particular. Okay. In a high key group, it's going to be fine because you're going to cover every profession across your 5 players that you play with every day. But I think it's bad for, especially with the new professions, people are going to be like locked into whatever they want to do, and they're not going to be as willing to like change. Like, for example, the slime shutter offer in DOS, people were willing to go grab engineering in season 1 and just hold engineering the whole expansion for that thing. Mm-hmm. But you can't just hold one engineering or one alchemy, or anything like that. This expansion, because professions are so important.
So they did recently change the engineering orb and the blacksmithing trap.
Okay.
which I would say is positive overall that they did change these things. Those were by far the two most important buffs in the dungeon, and if you didn't get them, you were losing multiple minutes on the timer.
Yeah.
I do think that the professions are especially too impactful. Definitely once you start getting up at the higher end. In my mind, there's no reason. So basically how the professions work is like you're only able to get specific combos, and there's a profession, it's called the Waterlogged Scroll, and it gives you 30% movement speed. That's on the same thing as getting 1% health and 1% mana per second back, which these are not the same in regards to power.
No, I would argue 30% movement speed. I mean, if I'm weakly no levering, that might actually come in handy. But
if I'm running back a lot,
yeah, if I'm constantly running back from the one checkpoint, that's pretty good.
The checkpoint's not bad. I actually don't
think it's not bad because that door opens.
Yeah, it's not bad because of where it is. I think overall, I think the dungeon's fun to play. I think that you've talked me down off of an A. I think that it's weird because it's fun, but it also has a lot of deductions, and so I understand why you would move it down into B.
Yeah,
I think the replayability is high and the length is good though. So
I agree. The length is good. Replayability, given that I'm not super upset that this is the Legion dungeon that came back, I guess it's replayability is also fine.
Pathing's pretty unique in here. You can play a lot of different stuff with pathing wise.
Yeah, because you can decide if you want to play the dock at the start or not, and that opens up like a ton of choices based on whether you do it or not.
Okay. Moving on to Halls of Valor. So they recently, whenever they re-released Halls of Valor, I thought this dungeon was fucking sick. They changed a lot of the trash in here to be more modern and more player friendly. But recently they changed the trash again and added a lot of like weird stuff. Like they added a purifier, which is the mod that channels. They added a purifier to the middle pack, and then they added a decent amount of shield maidens, which do the frontal.
Those are the frontal mobs.
Yeah, those are the cat killers.
The Devil's Taker routers.
Yeah, they added a lot of the shield maidens to the trash as well, and so I do think that whenever this dungeon was re-released, everybody's like, "Holy shit, this dungeon is sick!" But now the dungeon, they made the trash a lot more difficult, is how I feel about it. My initial impression is either this is low A or high B, and I actually think that this dungeon is pretty good. If they didn't redo the trash, I would have probably been inclined to put it in A, but I'm still, it's really close.
I think I could go for a high B on this one or a low A.
Yeah, it's weird because like this is really close to A in my opinion, because the length is 38 minutes. It used to be 45, but it's actually 38 minutes now. It's still you're probably not going to take up all 38 minutes just from the times we've been testing this dungeon. It could even get down to 30. Yeah. If they nerfed it to 36, the dungeon's going to be tight on your timer, but you're still probably fine. I think the big thing though is replayability. You can route through this dungeon a lot of different ways, and you don't realistically need Shroud as well because of how just wide open a lot of the dungeon is, and so you can come up with a decent amount of unique routes.
Yeah, I think that other good changes they made, the movement speed after each boss instead of just after you do the third boss.
Yep,
pretty good.
Yep.
I think that the RP is still kind of heavy in here, though. I think that brings it B for me.
Okay, I think that's pretty reasonable. I think that coupled with, I don't want to say it's poorly designed trash, but the amount of really difficult trash.
Yeah, it's definitely harder trash than most of the other keys.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Maybe not in this set, but harder than recent.
It's harder than it needs to be. It's just a lot of frontals.
There's a lot going on for sure. There's a lot of kicks. There's a lot of tank damage where I feel like my tank has to run a lot from like bleeds on the mobs after the first boss.
They did nerf that a bit, but yeah.
The marksmen are annoying because they jump out and they're not in the pack anymore.
Yep. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot going on, but I do think that like overall, not a bad dungeon. I think that B is like a dungeon that you, whenever you get it, you're like, all right, this is pretty reasonable to play. If you got stuck farming this dungeon for a trinket, you're not really pissed about it level.
Not exactly happy either, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I think that's about right. I think, like I said, the thing for me is the 30-second bridge into the 45 seconds of the Kings, into the 45 seconds for the Tettle's Killer, into the minute for Odin.
All right, let's not talk about that guy.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
I think the bosses are actually not bad anymore.
I would agree.
They changed the cadence on Heimdall to where you're only getting one horn, and then after the horn, it's the dragon sweeping across the playing field. That's totally fine. Herja, I think they changed some stuff where you're not going to get arcing zapped while you have the Expel Light. I don't know how they changed it, but they changed it to where you're not going to get like overlap killed.
Is good. I still think that boss is really hard, but I think that that's a good change.
I think that boss is it's got a good change. Fenrir is honestly the only boss that's really annoying in my
I think that
opinion.
the change they did to Fenrir, where the scent of blood gives you this massive movement speed bonus, is good.
The bleeds are the hard part, right? The bleeds and the
Yes.
bleeds are the hard part because they're tuned very tight right now, and so this may fall
Yeah.
into like a deduction based off tuning. But the bleeds are very heavy, and so you feel like you're obligated to clear every single time if you potentially can. And the way you have to clear is so hard if you don't have a blink.
Yeah.
I think overall though, Halls of Valor, nice B tier dungeon. Not really too much more to talk about here.
Yeah.
Okay, Nokhud Offensive. Where are we putting this thing?
You go ahead.
I think here's the deal. I think that Azure Vault's the worst dungeon in the season.
Really?
I know, contentious opinion. I think that Nokhud Offensive is better than Azure Vault, but noticeably worse than both Halls of Valor and Court of Stars.
I think that as it stands right now, Nokhud Offensive is the worst in the season.
Okay. Now, explain to me why. So first off, we can talk about the replayability and the length of the dungeon.
Okay, so starting with the length, it is way too long. They're like, timer aside, because 40 minutes is only two more than a Halls of Valor, and
Yeah.
I'm willing to put it 2 tiers lower, but the problem is the pacing. The thing that makes Algeth'ar Academy really good is that you do trash, then you do a boss. The problem with Nokhud Offensive is you do trash, then you do a boss, then you do this impossible trash, and then you do a really hard boss, and then you fight 15 minutes of trash before you get to do another boss.
I did spend 11 minutes, like anecdotally, I did spend 11 minutes in Nokhud fighting trash before I killed another boss today.
Yeah.
Now that was my choice. Like that was my choice with the route that we were doing, though.
Yes, it's by choice, but as it stands right now, due to tuning, that you have to do that.
Okay.
You're not going to play additional trash in the storm area besides what you're legally obligated to play right now.
Yeah.
The trash by the dragon boss is too far apart to make any like meaningful pulls happen after you do 1 or 2.
Let's talk about them in boss order. So that you're talking about the first boss trash right now, the dragon boss, yes?
Yeah, the dragon boss. Okay, well anyway, it's too far apart. So you can't make any like solid pulls happen there. And so you end up leaving after you've done like the couple of really good pulls you can get done there. The storm trash is too hard. Then you get over to the ghost trash, which is easy and groupable, but you have to do so much of it because the stuff at the last boss is really unplayable.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just fighting trash for 10, 12, 15 minutes.
So I generally think that it is okay. So first off, it's a 40-minute dungeon. In addition to that, it doesn't like there are a decent amount of options in regards to the pathing that you can do. It gives you more options, which allows you to play the dungeon in a different way. But I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't feel like the trash. It feels like the trash pulls are different, but it all feels like a lot of the trash in this dungeon has a lot going on. There's a decent amount of like visual clutter. Specifically, the trash that I take the most issue with is the burial grounds area trash right before the third boss, like the two target boss.
Yeah,
I take particular issue with the burial grounds trash because of how many spells are going off, how many kicks you have to get. In addition to that, you have to go and collect your soul every so often, and you also have orbs constantly spawning on you that you have to dodge out of the way of.
Yeah. You're constantly getting rooted randomly with a massive dot on you.
Yeah.
I would agree that trash is really bad. However, I would contend that the storm boss trash is just as bad, but for different reasons.
Okay.
Those being the fact that there are 4 different casts that one-shot you.
Let's talk about the dragon riding aspect of it. So no checkpoints in this no checkpoints in this dungeon, but I actually think the dragon riding aspect of it is it's actually not what. So whenever you hear dragon riding dungeon, you're thinking like, what was that dungeon from Wrath?
The Oculus.
The Oculus, yeah. You're thinking, oh god, this is gonna be cringe like the Oculus. It's not cringe. It's actually like open world design, and you're dragon riding through the zone. I don't mind. I don't mind the dragon riding part of it.
When they initially said dragon riding dungeon, I was like, this is going to be sick. And I actually think the dragon riding did turn out pretty good.
Yeah.
I think that the only problem, comes from if you die in the last area, it is a long flyback.
I think that it's I think that's pretty reasonable. How are you feeling about the boss design? I actually don't don't think the bosses are actually that bad. I think the bosses.
I really liked Raging Tempest. Good boss.
Good boss.
Simple.
Damage
but
buff.
hard. Yeah, damage buff. I'm doing big numbers.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that boss is actually pretty good. There's not that much going on, but there's enough going on that I'm not bored.
I think that overall this dungeon has pretty big deductions because of poorly designed trash and tuning as it currently stands.
Yes.
Is it redeemable? Absolutely.
Redeemable with fixes, absolutely.
It can absolutely get into a spot where it's fixed. I really don't like who put an 8 mob patrol. There was, okay, by the way,
I like that pull.
In the first boss area, there's an 8 mob patrol, and if you're doing a pack and it pats into you, you're probably wiping to the pack.
When I was just saying that you do a couple of good pulls, that's one of them. It's the 8 mobs with a 4 mob stationary on a thing. That's a good pull. Then you've got no more big pulls because there's an 8 mob patrol, and that takes up all the space for mobs in the whole room.
I think that the poorly designed trash is like one of the biggest deductions from the dungeon.
I think so too. Yeah.
So, but I do think that this dungeon can be redeemed.
I think that last boss is actually kind of ridiculous right now too.
It's ridiculously overtuned.
Yeah.
I think Azure Vault is going to be like a perennial C/D contender. Not a good dungeon. I think that Nokhud Offensive with some changes could get like, I don't think it's ever getting up to A, but I do think it could probably get up to like B.
I think it could squeak into the low B.
Yeah.
If they change a lot of tuning.
I think that Azure Vault maybe being as generous to Azure Vault. It's not a good dungeon. Okay. RLP, the Ruby Life Pools. This is the first dungeon we even saw from this expansion. Short dungeon. What's the timer on this thing? This thing isn't
30.
under. It's 30, right? We don't have anything that's under 30 timer. But if they wanted to reduce Ruby Life Pools under 30, I would accept.
I think if they're going to do that to one dungeon, it's not Ruby Life Pools. We didn't get to it yet.
It is this last
it's
dungeon.
Shadowmoon Burial Grounds.
It's also Jade Serpent. That dungeon could also be 25 minutes.
Yeah.
But Ruby Life Pools, 30-minute dungeon. It's actually a short 30. We actually have a lot of short 30s on this list. I call Court of Stars an in and out in 25. Ruby Life Pools, in
and out in 25.
In and out in 25. 3 bosses, really short. I think that those are big high marks. I think that 3 boss dungeons.
Yes. 3 boss dungeon, always good.
Yeah. Replayability of the dungeon,
pretty high.
You have 1 route. You may have 2 routes total for the whole expansion.
I still think it's pretty high, though.
Why?
I think that the trash is decently designed in the way that you can do a lot of it together. And when you're doing big pulls, even if it's the same big pulls for a year, they're still big. They're still kind of fun.
Seems pretty reasonable to me. I don't think that, like, I'm willing to deduct a ton of points off of replayability. I do think that the routing you're not going to be able to reroute this dungeon in any meaningful capacity.
Actually, there are 2 routes. When you get to the top, you can go left, or when you get to the top, you can go right.
Yeah.
You still got to go around the circle, though.
Yeah. There are like a couple of mobs. Basically, what I'm saying is like there are a couple of mobs you can skip. How much count can you get in this dungeon total? If you don't pull the storm collars that are like off to the side that are like channeling,
like 112% maybe.
Yeah.
If you pull every mob.
So you have like 3 mobs you can skip in the whole dungeon. So at the same point, though, if I had to put a letter on this thing, I'm actually looking at it's either high B or it's A, and I think that we don't have anything in A yet. I would be inclined to put this thing in A.
I was going to fight for A, yeah.
Yeah, I think that I would be inclined to put this thing in A. Where do you want to start with deductions? You can start us off here.
Well, not a lot of routing freedom.
Okay.
RP's a little annoying on the dragon flying up to the top of the temple.
I would classify that as the shittiest checkpoint I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think I'd agree.
So for those who don't know, there is 1 checkpoint in this dungeon. After you kill the first boss, you spawn at the first boss area, which you may think, oh yeah, that's pretty standard. Except
similar, the bottom of the temple.
Yeah, similar to after the second boss in Spires of Ascension, whenever you were on the opposite side of the angel platform, and you had to take the angel all the way across, you have to take the dragon all the way up to the top again after you died. You're like, great.
So I think the way that they can fix that is have 2 checkpoints. 1 at the bottom when you kill the first boss so you can quickly release, and a second one as soon as someone lands up top with the dragon.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable to me. That checks out.
The fact that if I die, it's not only 5 seconds, but then I spend 20 seconds on this dragon flying in a circle to go up, not good.
Okay, initial impressions on the mini bosses, Thunderhead and Flame Gullet.
Flame Gullet, fine. Thunderhead, too hard.
Still too hard? So would you classify this as a poorly designed mob, or would you classify this as tuning issue?
Poor tuning.
Okay.
I think that the mob design is pretty fine. It's like not anything we've not seen before. Like we've seen mobs just like it. And those turned out fine because they were tuned nicely. I think that it just does too much right now.
Seems pretty reasonable to me. I think that the tuning in this dungeon is a bit off in some aspects of it. The dot from the final boss is one of the aspects of it that I think is a bit too hard. Difficult, because like he puts this dot onto players periodically, but you can only really look and see who it's going to be targeting in advance if you have like either target, or you're like or you have the boss targeted, and so it doesn't really telegraph super well. And so if you don't pre-defensive it, you're getting owned. And this isn't like this is just a high key problem. No, you get like railed at a 15.
That is a 15 problem.
Yeah, you're getting railed at like a 15 if you're not paying attention.
Yeah. So the other boss I take issue with is the second boss.
So 2 out of the 3 bosses we have issues with. I actually don't have a problem with the last boss. I just think it's overtuned.
Yeah, I agree. It's overtuned. I think the last boss is like a fine design.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first boss is also a good design. Because it's percent based, and that's the issue I have with the second boss. Is it's not percent based, it's timer based. So when you get into these higher keys, or a tyrannical key even, you are killing like 35,000 ads instead of 3.
Yeah, I think that could be classified as just like a high key problem. That also can be classified as like a fundamental issue of the dungeon.
I think that it would be fine if it was percent based. Like every 20% you got one of those ads, it'd be fine. But I think the fact that as it stands right now in like an 18 tyrannical that we did on beta, by the time you kill that ad and it blows up, you've spawned another ad.
It's just difficult because you have to full focus the ads.
Yes. So you never really get time to hit the boss.
Yeah, it's just a problem because if they make the ads if they make the ads really trivial for lower end players, then they're appropriately scaled for higher end players, then it makes the fight like less fun for people who are just doing like weekly keys. Whereas like it's just designed in a weird way. I would tend to agree. I think where it stands right now, is it mission critical, needs to change right now? No. Is it
high on my list of wishes? Yes.
Yeah, is it signs of a problem? Yeah, probably. I think that
it's a thing of you never get the chance to hit the boss. So if the boss has 30 million health and each ad has 3 million, then you're effectively doing like a 70 million health boss.
Yeah.
Because you're spawning so many ads.
I think just really
never getting a chance to hit the boss.
I think just really quick, the only other things that I think are overtuned are like the thunderstorm mobs, which are
those things are
still ridiculous. Yeah.
It's crazy that even with all this, we're still willing to put it in A.
It's a good dungeon. Like it
is a fine dungeon.
I have fun playing it. I don't think it's like overly complicated. How would I even describe it? It's like
I don't know.
It's kind of like Mists. I guess it's kind of like Mists of Tyrannus Scythe, where it was like 3 bosses. Did it have some cringe stuff? Absolutely.
Yes.
Was it still pretty good, all things considered? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I remember when we zoned into it on alpha, my first thought was that this is a lot like Halls, because you have to kill the 4 guys before you can do a boss.
Yeah. Nothing.
And they're
like
about
Halls.
the same difficulty as a shard.
It's nothing like Halls, though.
But yeah, I'd say it's probably closer to Mists, where it's like some stuff was good, some stuff is not so good. Still pretty good dungeon.
Still pretty decent, yeah. I don't mind the 3-boss dungeon. I think that I don't want every dungeon to be 3 bosses, but I do think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Shadowmoon, another legacy dungeon that they're bringing back.
Initially,
yeah. Okay, what were you gonna say?
Initially, I was not a fan of this dungeon coming back.
Okay, I heard Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, and I thought, why that dungeon?
That is pretty much what I thought as well. I thought, why that one? They got lots of other choices. I would have liked to see Everbloom, for example. Great dungeon.
I thought that was going to be their pick.
I thought so too. I will say, after having done it a few times, I'm willing to give this one an A.
I also am willing to give this one an A. They actually reworked a considerable amount in this dungeon.
It's very not bad.
So first off, it's easy.
It's easy and it's short.
I'm gonna be straight up. It's easy. So
that may not hard.
That may be why I'm impartial to this dungeon. It's not hard.
So the thing is,
and it
feels easy because this, for the same reason that Iron Docks was hard because of the trash. The bosses in there didn't do anything, and the bosses in here, you can tell they're from WoD. They don't do anything.
I had an issue very early on, and I made a video on this about how the trash in Shadowmoon Burial Grounds also is not deadly. And when I
Yep.
said it's not deadly, I meant
It doesn't
100
do anything.
100% of the difficulty of this dungeon is put onto your tank being able to tank mobs.
Yeah.
But realistically, this dungeon's not that complicated. There are some aspects. They've added some casts. There's some like death bolt casts that you have to kick now, and there's some stuff. There's a little bit more added complexity to this dungeon than whenever we were initially playing it.
It's a little more complex than it was 8 years ago. Yeah.
But overall, not that hard. Now, the replayability of this dungeon, not at an all-time high in regards to, am I able to do a different route in this dungeon? No, you're walking in a straight line.
No, it is a straight line. Well, actually, after the very first pack, you can, depending on where the void spawn stands, you can go left or you can go right and fight the same pack on either side. And that's your choice.
There's no routing differential, but I do think even such, the dungeon is fairly fun just to do.
There's as much routing change here as there is in workshop. That is to say, one pack.
Unbelievably, side note, is this contender for the best checkpoints? I think this contender
one after every boss, right?
I don't think there's one after the first boss. There's not one after
the first boss, and I was actually making an issue about that the other day. If they're not going to add one there, I think that the second boss one should move there.
Actually, never mind, because Azure Vault has the best checkpoints, right? With the teleporter.
Yeah, teleporting after every boss. I would agree.
So Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, number two for second best checkpoints.
The only way that the checkpoints get better in here is, like I said, you take the second boss checkpoint, you move it to the first boss, because there's like a 100-yard stretch between the two.
Yeah.
But until you kill the second boss, you're running from the start of the key, which is like a minute.
But yeah, no, I mean, all the stuff like RP in the dungeon, there isn't really any RP in the dungeon.
Not any that I can think of.
Checkpoints mostly fine, poorly designed trash. I
don't even think the trash is poorly designed, to be honest. I think it's just
there's some dated shit. I think that the trash that's after the first boss that channels onto targets and you are not supposed to either interrupt nor stun those mobs. I think that there's some stuff that should be changed about how that trash works.
I think that the Rending Void Lash killing you in 2 ticks, but the fact that it doesn't show up if you just let the other mobs hit you a little harder.
Yeah.
That could probably use a look.
Yeah. Bosses are fine though. I actually think the bosses are the high point of this dungeon. I think all the bosses here are sick.
I agree. I don't think that any of the bosses really do anything, but yet they are not awful. They don't feel bad to play.
I like them. I think they're fun.
I think they're pretty basic.
Even when I get eaten.
Well, maybe don't stand in melee.
Okay. Temple of the Jade Serpent, the final dungeon that we got on our list here. I'm feeling hard B.
I'm also feeling a B. I'm thinking it's worse than Court of Stars.
It's probably the shortest dungeon this season, by the way.
Yes, but not by timer.
Well, okay, by timer it's 31 minutes, but it is definitely not 31 minutes.
Is it 31? I thought that it was 30.
It is, I think, 31 currently.
Okay.
It was 35, and now
it could be 21, and I would argue it's still a good timer.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the length is by far the shortest dungeon. Replayability of this dungeon at an all-time low. There's basically no variance. Okay, so now we kind of talked about how we were memeing about how Shadowmoon you could either go right or left. Temple of the Jade Serpent, you can start by going right, but you're going to pull all the exact same mobs regardless of whether you start going right or start going left.
So when they, like I was saying with Shadowmoon, when they announced this one, was not happy. Because I seem to recall hearing that the CM strat was that you split your group in 2, and half went left and half went right. And this dungeon does not feel good because it feels like you should be splitting yourself in half and going left and right.
I don't know about that. Okay, RP, no RP to really speak of. It's
if you die on Wise Mary, you can't release until he's done talking. That's pretty bad RP.
Okay, well that sounds like just an oversight.
Maybe just don't die.
Checkpoints, there are none, is the TLDR, and there's a door that probably should open that doesn't.
I swear that door used to open in MoP when you pulled the third boss.
I don't know. There's a door that should probably open but doesn't, but realistically, the run back is not long enough to warrant complaining about. It's just, like, annoying.
So, I think my issue is that depending which way you go first, right? That's the way that you can't go if you die during the third boss.
Mm-hmm.
And so the issue is that I think that the strategy, because of the way that the two first mobs on the right are right now, I think you're not going to end up playing them. So if that door stays not opening, it's kind of hard to get back if you wipe
Yeah.
without like sending another invis pod or sending another shroud. And I think that if that door opens, that problem is solved.
Okay.
The problem is that there's trash. Like if you want to go back left, then you have to do a ton of extra trash that you would have cleared going right.
So where are the biggest deductions then? Poorly designed trash, poorly designed bosses, or tuning? Because it sounds like we're kind of tiptoeing around some deductions, but none of them are like, oh my god, why is this a B?
Poorly designed. Poorly designed trash, I think.
Okay.
They tried to modernize it. Like they added that one mob in the middle of the courtyard. Also,
I didn't mind that mob.
I don't think that mob's bad. I just think that it's like poorly designed in the way that it is constantly spawning these mobs that if you kill them too close in succession to each other, you blow up your whole group.
That's annoying.
I think that the frontals are not very well telegraphed. For example, is it the haunting gaze or something?
That's a fervent, but yeah, from the dude, it is poorly telegraphed.
Oh, is
though.
it a fervent?
Okay, yes.
Well, either way, I know that I accidentally walked on my tank and I died to something, and I felt like it was not telegraphed at all.
Because it's not.
Yeah. Also, let's not kid ourselves. The bosses are not really that well designed.
I like Wise Mary, the first boss, and I like the last boss.
I don't. Okay, I was talking about this yesterday with some of our friends. The way that they can make Wise Mary better is by making it more distinguishable whether it's a charge up splash or the actual splash. They're too similar of a design right now.
Okay, that's fair. I do think that generally. Okay, so they reworked that boss a lot. I do actually think that boss is pretty good, all things considered. If that was the worst part of the dungeon, this would probably be an S tier dungeon.
Yeah.
I also like. I think that there are problems with the last boss, particularly kind of similar to the Court of Stars and Ruby life pools issues that you had, where the ads were spawning too frequently, and it's time based, and so
there as well.
There can be some issues with that. I do lend issue to the second and the third boss of the dungeon, where the double council fight. It's like the Adoris and Aspix remake. If you guys remember Temple of Sethrilus, I think that boss sucks. I still don't.
I also think that boss.
I've done that dungeon maybe 15 times. I still don't know what the hell that boss does.
I still don't know what causes it, like what the frequency of them getting the stack is.
I know
what counts, what doesn't.
I know what counts and what doesn't. I just don't know what I'm taking damage from half the time on the boss.
Yeah. So they could have gone with the other fight, which I actually think would have been better, which was the all the paper cutouts, and then you had like the sun. You know what I'm talking about?
I'm not old.
Okay, well that's not true. Anyway, there was another fight that you could 50-50 there, and I think that one might have been a better choice. I think this one, the fact that I got no idea why I was at 10% health the entire time yesterday, not great.
Doesn't telegraph it. And then the third boss in the courtyard area, you know,
the fact that you got to choose that boss right now.
I mean,
I don't know about that one.
A wave projectile speed could probably use to be cut in half.
Like, I don't know about half. I would say that it could be 10% slower.
They got race car waves coming off
those guys. Definitely
right
queuing up for the Indy 500 after that.
Yeah. I think that overall the replayability of the dungeon is probably the biggest deductions for me. It's just like.
Yeah, if I roll,
it's okay. It's similar to these other B tier dungeons. If I see them in my bags, I'm like, damn. Sometimes I'm be like, damn, I'm in a mood. What if we went to Court of Stars? And they're like, yeah, fuck it, we go. Or yeah, I'm in a mood. What if we went to Temple of Jade Serpent? Everybody's like, oh yeah, that's fine. Now it's like pulling teeth to go to Azure Vault or Nokhud Offensive. Any of these dungeons in B are fine. Any of these dungeons in A, people are like, yeah, I'm in. And then
Algeth'ar Academy, and everyone goes, please, I already did it 12 times today. I don't want to go again.
Capital B bet.
I think that the problem with Temple is it falls into the junkyard issue where the dungeon itself is not particularly difficult.
Yeah.
But it's not fun either.
Yeah.
You're just kind of going through because you know you could re-roll your keys off of it. I think that's my big issue with it.
Yeah.
It does not feel that fun to play.
All right, after having ranked all of these, do you think that anything needs moving? I think that I'm actually pretty okay with this. I don't think that Azure Vault and Nokhud need to be in D. Even though they're not like particularly the most fun dungeons, D had some dread attached to it, and like a weekly no leaver kind of way.
I think that if those dungeons don't get touched and we go like a couple months, those things will find themselves going into D from C.
Yes.
But I think as they are, they can be in C. I think that for all the praise we gave Ruby Life Pools, it's below Shadowmoon.
Okay.
Otherwise, I feel like pretty happy with this.
I think I'm pretty happy with this too. All right. Thank you guys all for watching. Thank you, Corey, for joining me. I will link his stuff down in the description, and you guys can go check out his content as well. Goodbye.